Everything Walt Disney did, he did first and foremost for himself. The child for whom his cartoons were intended was the child he had been. He could be intolerant, harsh, and cunning, as children can be harsh. Sincere kindness coexisted in him with extreme callousness. The setting: a farm near the town of Marceline, Missouri, 48 acres of land, and a frame house with an outhouse like a birdhouse in the backyard. The characters: Elias Disney, his children and household, his wife Flora, 4 sons, a daughter, a horse, a cow, a piglet, and a pet mouse named Mickey that the middle son, Walt, fussed over. Honest poverty reigned on the farm, and Elias Disney kept his family in fear of God. Everyone at home worked from early morning until late evening, and he whipped each of his sons no fewer than twice a week. "No, Papa, no, I will not do it again," shrieks the future genius of animation, pinned to a wooden bench by his father's powerful knee. A wide belt of bullhide whistles down onto a skinny, boyish backside. 9-year-old Walt is in for 6 years of regular beatings. Before us is a typical American family, headed by a stern and pitiless patriarch who punished the slightest disobedience, where everyone worked hard, saved money, and dreamed of something more. The atmosphere was austere. Elias Disney had his own ideas about what a happy childhood should be. There was no place for nonsense like those useless colored pencils. With tears, Walt begged his daddy to buy him at least 1 box, but Elias was unyielding. The boy made do with twigs and thin resin. The result was a charming tar-painted cow on the wall of the house. That was followed by an especially merciless whipping, and the cow on the farmhouse wall could be seen for a long time thereafter. Soon, though, Daddy relented. Walt drew the neighbor veterinarian's horse, and the man paid 5 cents for a portrait of his beloved mare. Pencils moved from the category of useless trinkets into the category of useful things. Walt received 2 boxes at once and used up all the paper in the house. What brightened the boy's life were drawing and his love of animals. His charges at various times included a piglet, a dog, a turtle, and a mouse rescued from a cat. Surely the law of psychological compensation was at work here. First, Walt feared his father, and then he truly came to hate him and transferred his tenderness to animals. This was unfair. Elias Disney wanted good for his children. He raised them as he himself had been raised, and with a zeal worthy of a better use, tried to force his impressionable, extraordinarily gifted son into the typical frame of the average American. Nothing good came of it. Walt's future phobias and peculiarities would owe much to his daddy's belt. The farm did not pay for itself, and the family moved to Chicago. There, Elias Disney opened a factory that made fruit jelly. Gelatin was rendered from the hooves and bones of dead cattle, and the fruit was usually blemished. Walt sorted spoiled apples and apricots and shoveled them into a huge boiling vat. The smell of rotting fruit haunted him all his life. As a child, it was especially unbearable because he was always sleep-deprived. Walt took a job as a newspaper delivery boy. For 5 years, he got up at 3:30 in the morning and headed to the post office. Work, school, factory, home, there was nothing else in his life. Not far from the school was an amusement park, and Disney would stand for hours at the entrance. He could not buy a ticket and had to listen to the music from beyond the fence. The poor kid, in truth, barely had a childhood. Much later, building Disneyland and Walt Disney World, he tried to claw back what fate had shorted him. As he grew up and became famous, Disney tried to forget the little boy he had been. The attempt was hopeless. His childhood determined all his later life. Everything he did afterward was rigidly programmed by boyhood fears and humiliations. Again and again, he tried to live a different, happy childhood. Already an adult, famous and successful, Disney laid a miniature railroad around his home and, wearing a station master's cap, directed the traffic himself. It cost him nothing to fire someone he had worked with for 10 years. When business was at stake, the word friendship did not exist for him. People who did not know him well were baffled. They did not guess that Disney lived outside conventional morality. Traditional ethical norms did not apply to him. For years, the head of Walt Disney Productions was an informant of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and did not consider it a sin. He played by his own rules. To those who would not accept them, the great animator was merciless. The life behind him did not encourage sentimentality. By all logic, Disney should not have become Disney. His parents did not encourage his urge to dirty up paper, and his schoolteacher was infuriated that Walt had colored the entire classroom. He had no free time, no money for drawing lessons, and his father sent him to a third-rate school. When he finished it, he had to go work for the Missouri Pacific Railroad and spend the week shuttling between Kansas City and Jefferson. The fact that he entered the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts may seem like a miracle. An even greater miracle was that he finished it, even if only the evening program. Disney lived at twice the intensity of an ordinary man and believed devoutly in everything a respectable American commoner was supposed to believe in. The First World War began, and Walt decided that a true American belonged on the fields of battle. He did not meet the age requirement, but that did not bother him. He altered the documents, adding a year, forged his parents' signatures, and went to France with the American Red Cross. There, his talents as a draftsman, performer, and businessman blossomed. For a modest fee, Walt painted decorations on his comrades' tunics and bullet holes on their helmets. His ambulance was painted from roof to wheels. Returning home, Disney staged his first little show. From the front, Walt brought a present for his mother. Opening the box, Mrs. Disney gasped, clutched her heart, and quietly slid to the floor. Inside lay a bloody human finger. To make matters worse, the stump twitched. Disney was delighted. Beforehand, he had made a hole in the lid and slipped his own little finger through it. That was his signature style. With similar jokes, the great humanist entertained friends and family right up to his death. Elias Disney taught him decisiveness and toughness, the ability to endure and to be ruthless. Walt, once and for all, decided what he wanted and went toward his chosen goal, no matter what. He worked long and hard, periodically suffered failure, went broke, lost money and employees. And the next morning, he would start over. Disney was a dyed-in-the-wool workaholic and a professional optimist. For 11 months of the year, he met each day with a smile, and in the 12th, he would plunge into a crushing depression and become unbearable. The need to be constantly in form and to parry the blows of fate, all while radiating charm, demanded immense inner tension. He lived at the edge of a nervous breakdown and had to keep himself in check at all times. Outsiders did not notice. Disney's will was made of iron. To others, he seemed light-hearted, carefree, and lucky. At the advertising agency where he landed after the war, he was highly valued, and the boss was genuinely distressed when the capable, cheerful, dependable young man handed in his notice and set off to become an animator. The boss could not fathom why he would give up a sure living. In the early 1920s, $40 a week was excellent pay. Disney did not explain that he had worked in advertising only for the money. He needed several $100s to open a tiny film studio. He earned them and said goodbye forever to the ad business. The first studio and the first failure. In the year 1920, Disney began producing 3-minute cartoons, grams of laughter, and they did not bring him a cent. He was as poor as a church mouse. The shed that housed the studio was seized for debt, and Disney left for Hollywood in moccasins borrowed from a friend out of charity. His own shoes had given up the ghost, and the future millionaire had no money for new ones. In Hollywood, those cast-offs, battered on Chicago's pavements, looked out of place. Along the tidy streets of the movie Mecca strode people in fine patent leather shoes. By neat cottages, cactus bloomed and orange trees shone green. Shiny cars flashed past with movie stars and studio owners inside. Not one of them cared a whit about the youngster who fancied himself an animator. Walt did not burden himself with this. He rented another cheap shed and opened a film studio. This time he was lucky. In truth, the luck was well prepared. In advertising, Disney had met a gifted artist, Ub Iwerks, who became his right hand. The finances of the studio were handled by Roy Disney, Walt's brother, an experienced accountant. Relations among this trio were very strange. Ub was the true creator of Mickey Mouse, and Walt could not take a step without Roy. Yet he did not fully trust either of them. The complex driven into Disney by his father was at work. Walt constantly proved to others and to himself that he was the head of the house. He underpaid Ub and gave him no real power at the studio. He and Roy often fought. After Walt moved to California, Roy took him in, and they quarreled every other day. Luckily for them both, Roy was about to get married. Soon he moved out, and his apartment passed entirely into Walt's hands. Ub, Roy, and Walt built one of the greatest empires in film. It all began very modestly, with short cartoons that did not stand out much from other work of the kind. Then came Alice in Cartoonland. Disney had drawn up the contract ineptly, and the distributor snatched the rights to that series, and at the same time appropriated Disney's Rabbit Oswald. And then Ub Iwerks created Mickey Mouse. He sketched the first design. Disney gave the mouse his name. Mickey was the name Walt had given the mouse that lived on his family farm. Wilfred Jackson picked out a tune on the harmonica, and Mickey set off on his triumphant march, first across the United States of America, and then around the world. Steamboat Willie, the cartoon starring Mickey Mouse, did not win the Academy Award, but became one of the first widely seen synchronized sound cartoons and made Disney famous. His first Academy Award came later for Flowers and Trees in the year 1932. In total, Walt Disney would receive 26 Academy Awards, including honorary awards. After Mickey came Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first feature-length animated film. The idea arose by chance. Disney was to receive an international award in Paris. Walt and Roy came for the ceremony, bought tuxedos, and on the way back to the hotel, ducked into a cinema. For about an hour and a half, the French ran Mickey Mouse cartoons, one after another. Thus, unexpectedly, the plan for a super project was born. A cartoon created at the running time of a live-action feature. To realize it, Disney had to take out a loan of about $1.5 million. He loved and knew how to take risks, loved scale and adventure. Had the project failed, Disney might never have recovered. If he thought about that, he never showed it. Returning to California, Walt began recruiting new artists, and his friends marveled at his energy and optimism. 6,000 artists responded to the announcement. 30 were hired, and 6 months later, 10 remained. $1,700,000 invested in the picture turned into a profit of $8 million. No cartoon had ever brought in such money. In fact, $8 million was an absolute record for the entire cinema of the 1930s. After Snow White, Disney took his place among the Olympians. He became a cult figure of American film. It was then that the Disney myth began to take shape. With its smiling, self-made man, friend to children and animals, spreading goodness all around. This charming picture had only the most approximate relation to reality. Success cost Disney dearly. Everything had its price. Constant nerves took their toll, and impotence became his constant companion. Friends snickered that Disney's secret complexes were spilling onto the screen. The candidates to voice Snow White underwent a strict selection. The famous Deanna Durbin was rejected. Disney found her voice too sexual. The winner was 17-year-old Adriana Caselotti. Her crystalline voice chimed and shimmered and carried no hint of the bedroom. The topic was excruciating for Disney. He worked too hard. The work demanded too much of him. He simply had no time for women. He did not know them and was afraid of them. And yet Disney was extraordinarily charming, knew how to court gracefully, and could talk a lady's head off like no one else. He faltered when it was time to take the decisive step. The young man was catastrophically unsure of himself. He met his future wife, the pretty brunette Lillian Bounds, at his brother Roy's wedding. For a long time he tried to devise a suitable pretext to see her, and finally decided to act on impulse. "I bought a new suit. Do you want to see me in it?" She did. They met. And a few days later they woke up in the same bed. When Disney turned 24, they married, but on their wedding night, Walt could not perform his conjugal duties. Nerves took over. Time went on, and things did not improve. Walt worked incessantly, was always on edge, and began to drink besides. Marriage became a new source of stress. He wanted children, envied his brother's numerous offspring, and was ashamed of his inadequacy. Disney went to the doctors. They advised him to take up sports. Sexology was still in its infancy, and doctors firmly believed that sexual weakness could be beaten with cold showers, polo, and boxing. Oddly enough, it helped. In the year 1933, the Disney's daughter Diane was born. They wanted more children, but the second time athletics did not do the trick, and a few years later the couple adopted little Sharon. From then on, sex no longer concerned Disney, but his depressions came more often. His new studio in Burbank, built with the money Snow White earned, rivaled Ford's automobile plants in scale and swallowed him whole. About 2,000 people worked at the studio, and Walt demanded total dedication from them. To be sure that no one kept a single minute of company time from him, Disney applied Ford's assembly line principle. Each artist drew a single detail, a single movement, thousands of images of a mouth spreading into a broad smile or an arm lifting. The work was heavy and monotonous, and Disney paid little for it. He was convinced that creative labor should bring joy, and money was a distant second, especially his money. Yet the atmosphere in the team was truly democratic. Disney would casually clap subordinates on the shoulder, call them by their first names, joke with the secretaries, and beaming, race between the rows of artists bent over their paper. As Elias Disney had done, Walt ruled his little kingdom by his own lights. He raised some up and whipped others, docking bonuses and failing to raise salaries for years. Like his father, he was devoutly certain of his own infallibility and did without a union. The studio workers disagreed. First, they went on strike. Then they took Disney to court and won. Disney knew how to yield. The next morning, he grunted, "Whoever does not join the union, I will fire." The artists laughed with relief, peace and harmony returned, and a few years later, Disney settled accounts with the defiant in full. The Second World War began, and he managed to make good money on it as well. His biggest customers were the Departments of Defense of the United States of America and of Canada. Disney released propaganda films, Your Enemy, Germany, and the like, and moved into training films. His pictures taught pilots to land on aircraft carriers, infantrymen to handle grenade launchers and use individual dressings, and he implored civilians to buy war bonds. That was not enough. He decided to make a personal contribution to the fight against Germans, Japanese, Bolsheviks, and the accursed liberals. Near the end of the war, Disney joined a patriotic league founded by fundamentalist filmmakers. After the war, he worked closely with the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Senator McCarthy received documents implicating participants in that earlier strike. This time, Disney managed to be rid of them. The grateful animator became a confidential source for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and informed on his free-thinking liberal friends. He continued to maintain excellent relations with them and regularly reported their questionable remarks to J. Edgar Hoover's agency. The American Security Service could not have been happier. In the Bureau's archives, Disney's reports are preserved to this day. The file runs to more than 500 pages. Walt became increasingly intolerant, and now his depressions lasted for months. Sometimes he would spend entire days staring at a wall, not responding to other people's speech. He repelled himself, and others irritated him even more. Meanwhile, his studio continued to release superb cartoons. Often, however, the films were his ideas only. Disney, the artist, had dissolved into a brilliantly organized animation assembly line. He felt out new paths and was the first to pay serious attention to the very young medium of television. Other filmmakers looked down on the small screen with extreme condescension, but Disney recognized a profitable ally. He sold his old cartoons to television and began making live-action films for it. Everything he touched turned to gold. Television entered every American home and brought Disney's cartoons with it. The live-action films brought him new millions. He grew rapidly richer and felt ever greater psychological discomfort. Disney had wanted to devote his life to creation, but became a manager, and the sense of his own barrenness tormented him. In childhood, he had been saved by a love of animals. With age, he found his solace in his daughters, Diane and especially Sharon, who became Walt's closest friend. He fretted over their health, lavished gifts on them, and with a passionate intensity that defied logic, concerned himself with their safety. Disney hid his daughters from the public and forbade newspapers to print their photographs. Only at the age of 8 did they learn that their father was that Disney, the famous animator. His daughters' marriages were a tragedy for Disney. They had grown up for good and became strangers to him. And Disney did not like adults. Up to the age of 12, all employees' children received Christmas presents from him. Anyone who turned 12, he personally crossed off the list. His own daughters were no exception. Children were beginning to discover the real and unrighteous world, and they ceased to interest him. Two completely different people lived inside Disney. The tough, unfastidious businessman who built a grand film company, and the slightly crazy idealist trying to realize his own utopia on Earth. A half-starved boy had stood at the entrance to an amusement park, listening to the music. A millionaire built Disneyland and then Walt Disney World, two of the largest amusement parks in the world where make-believe posed as the truth. He put several $100,000 of his own money into the first project and added several million in loans. Few believed it would work. Even loyal Roy thought his brother was being fanciful. A large tract of seemingly worthless land was purchased. Soon it sprouted a toy railroad, a river stocked with electronic crocodiles, Snow White's castle, countless Mickey Mouses, and other marvels. The park began to make money even before it was finished. The second project, Walt Disney World, proved even more successful. The company Disney created ran at full throttle, and the sudden death of the founding father did not stop the machine he had tuned so carefully. Not even the power struggle that flared afterward dented profits. Roy the younger and Diane's husband, former football player Ron Miller, fought over the inheritance for nearly 10 years. People whispered that Disney tricked friends and foes, even here. Supposedly, he did not die but had himself frozen. When the time came that lung cancer would be curable, he would be brought out of suspension, healed, and once again take the helm of Walt Disney Productions.